It's the 18th of December 2021. 2022, my apologies. The end of the year is what I was going to say. Hope everybody had a great weekend. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclear proctologist.org. You can call in 709-589-4406. All 5 of you can. 8 of you now. It's 709-589-4406. So lots of news to get through. Of course, the industry, you know, if you're trying to wrap your mind around Fukushima, it's hard to wrap your mind around if you're not familiar with this subject, and let alone Fukushima. You got to be familiar with the subject, unfortunately, to clue in without some kind of external clues helping you. So there's multiple reactors, 4 reactors confirmed, destroyed. They only emit the 3 meltdowns, but reactor 4, they were changing the fuel, which meant over half the fuel was still. They only change half at a time. So that obviously melted down. At the top of the buildings were 2 fuel pools on top of each building. So there's actually 4 meltdowns, reactor 1, 2, 3, and 4. And at the top of each building was 2 fuel pools with around 3,400 assemblies, plus could be up to 4,300, say, right? So over 6 million pounds of assemblies, of fuel in assemblies, in the fuel pools at the top of the building. So the very worst of design. That was all lost. So the worldwide media happily came out and pretended they're in the fuel pools that actually doesn't exist at reactor 4. And the fuel pools would have been at the very top of the building. There's just a little tiny fraction of the bottom, and it's destroyed. So they built this structure to your right, off-site, brought it in, and pinned it together. So it's very hard to wrap your mind around the scale of this story, because we're talking about a 19-story building, and when most people look at that, they don't see a 19-story building. There's a disconnect, because typically a 19-story building would look like a skyscraper or something like that. Just hang on here now. This scale here, you can see the scale of just small structure right here. Well, that's on the exact same scale as that structure there, except for this one is for reactor 1. That one is the remains of reactor 4. And so it happened in 2011. In 2013, they're claiming they're in a building that don't exist. So in 2013, when it looked like the building to your left, the media is claiming that they're actually in that building. This is the remains of reactor 3. And at the very top of, you see the 2 type pools up there in the reds? That's fuel pools. And because they don't have a repository, they're full. So they built a, that was destroyed, as you can see to your left over there. There's no fuel pools in that building either. So they built the structure off-site, brought it in, laid it over it, and then the media came out and pretended to look like that. And this. And that. But in reality, the pool doesn't exist. It's the same as reactor 4. So there's 4 fuel pools with around 6 million pounds in each minimum in the top of each building. And so the media, universities, government agencies remained silent, never challenged these assertions, and participated in the lies. And they have bombarded you for years, your whole life, with whenever there's a nuclear accident. In this case, it's Fukushima. They'll come out and mock you for worrying about it because they'll say it's like eating a banana, walking in sunshine, flying on an airplane, climbing a mountain, sleeping next to somebody. There's a big list of lies that they're going to come out, and they've been doing this for 80 years. And the reality of it is we're in a lot of trouble because this actually happened. And for those who don't understand radioactive fallout, it's so bad that this is just a fraction of the media, worldwide has participated in a lie, an absurd lie to suggest that the buildings are fine. And it's because of radioactive fallout and the damage it does to you and the species, and there's around 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries, illnesses, will come up before cancer. So they tell you it's like a banana, and they also say the only thing that can happen is cancer, and there's no cancer clusters. And what we've been doing for quite a while is we covered a 24-hour news cycle. And in each story, we check the story to see if they're going to tell any common lies. And if they do, we'll come out and we'll call them out for it, and we'll move on to the next story. And we'll do that for a couple of hours. In other words, every single story, every single day that's published worldwide is full of misinformation to manipulate you and deceive you. And in order for that to happen, all the journalists have to participate in it. You can't have a dissenting voice. So what we've showed unequivocally is the cards are stacked against us and the species, and they're heartless. They're remorseless, and there's nothing too evil that they won't do. And we have demonstrated that they have no intentions of stopping. So we got a humble little show where we try to inform the population that you don't want to eat the bananas from Japan. Should nuclear university students work at Fukushima nuclear meltdowns instead of the homeless victims? So it's only homeless and destitute and victims of society and immigrants who don't speak the language? And more bad news today for the salmon. We've done the research expeditions because there's one of the big problems with the salmon was that the glaciers are gone because of Japan has changed the environment. It's pulsing energy every second. Invisible snowstorms covering the planet, doing it for 80 years. But now there's been this major pulse on the planet. And what happened was the glaciers, when the big clouds of radiation are coming in, they hit the glaciers, the Rocky Mountains, the Cascades, and they lose half of their payload or more, and then they can rise over the mountains. But this radiation doesn't allow the ice to crystallize anymore. And to everybody's horror and shocks, within a few years, probably about 5 years, the glaciers were almost gone in northern British Columbia, Canada. That trend continued, and over the next year or two, it was lost. And so that cold glacier water would come down all the rivers and estuaries and would maintain temperatures all year long. And if there was droughts, it was more important again because it would keep the level of the water high enough for salmon to get back up the river and spawn. And so if they don't get up the river for 5 or 6 years straight with no spawning, because the cycles are every 2, 3, 4 years. So if you skip through 4 or 5 years, there's no cycle anymore for salmon to come back and spawn. And so then you see the species wiped out. And that's what we're seeing today now, a total collapse. And the same thing for the seafloor, because the radiation gathers up on the seafloor, because you have, it's better for me to show you before I say it, you have symmetrical plumes in a matter of just a couple of weeks. This is day 19. So that's the Pacific, that's the Atlantic. And normally in both oceans, the moisture, evaporation, causes tens of thousands of miles of clouds, rain clouds to form. And so the phytoplankton, the basis food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain live at the top of the oceans. And so they were annihilated in increments faster than most species because they're at the surface. We've done many long-term research expeditions from Vancouver to Alaska, and you can find that documentation up at the nuclearparktologist.org. The media has taken the low road and has bombarded the population in Hollywood and the rest of them, schools, with the propaganda. But we still have a problem. Now, and so we're pretending the problem doesn't exist and trying to promote more of the problem, which is the nuclear industry. So these plumes, this one is based on venting, by the way, not the actual meltdowns. It should be infinitely worse looking and thicker than that. And so this is 19 days, and there's many models that correspond to the radioactive fallout from different, these are all from different countries, right? So there's many models, and they're all based on downplaying the actual numbers. This model is based on 20 days of radioactive fallout. This one is 19 days. And so this was a significant event, believe it or not. And we're seeing there's up to 1,800 illnesses. So we're seeing a huge spike in illnesses that's being downplayed as global warming. And global warming, for all we can understand, legitimately is 80 years of nuclear releases into the environment. You're stacking them up. They never go away. And they live for millions of years. They pulse energy almost at the speed of light of every second. Grace Stanke never imagined a nuclear engineer winning the Miss American crown. She's probably the first nuclear engineering student, 20-year-old student, that ever entered it. And she, very pretty, but she didn't deserve to win. So therefore, why did she win? Well, because this is the nuclear industry is on the precipice of dying, and its legacy is dependent upon it getting favorable coverage. And again, the cards are stacked against us, right? They control the media. And just another way, 20-year-old University of Wisconsin spoke with people. She prepares to promote all forms of clean energy, and she's referring to nuclear, obviously. Zero carbon energy said, I'm a big fan of zero carbon energy. That gave 865,000 extra cancers to Japan in just the first year after their nuclear meltdowns, a spike of almost 1 million cancers. Cancer is usually latent. It's usually 1,800 illnesses. And she's by no means the prettiest girl or close to it. They're the most talented or close to it. I know that, and again, that zero carbon energy, that's 3 times in the first couple of paragraphs. And then nuclear energy is safe and effective. It's one of the safest forms of power available. It's 35 times more resource intensive and pollution just to build it, aka carbon, which no species can live without, by the way. She's the farthest thing from the most talented, prettiest girl there on top of it. She was surprised because she knew it. Breakthrough hype puts unfair pressure on science. Breakthrough hype. They're talking about nuclear fusion. But the reality of it was, nuclear fusion, this so-called discovery, is from Los Alamos National Laboratory, who's is a legacy Manhattan nuclear disease factory in Idaho. Or Los Alamos. And the fusion, any fusion breakthroughs at that place is for weapons. Like the Soviets' biggest bomb was a fusion bomb, was equal to 3,800 Hiroshimas going off at one time. That was fusion. Scanning the coverage nuclear fusion breakdown announced by the U.S. National. It was exciting news, but put undue pressure on journalists who are busy apologizing for lobbyists. Advocates of nuclear fusion says it's cleaner and safer. Advocates of nuclear fusion. Yeah, why not name somebody's name? Because they got a long history of saying anything nuclear is safer, like Prince has just done. Advocates of nuclear princess, the nuclear atomic plague princess is what we got to. She's the atomic plague princess. More nuclear power is what both parties want. Matthews Yegelis or something. Yeah, what a disgusting betrayal he celebrates. The non-regulatory commission still hasn't done anything instead of generating a new, simpler rule that will make reactor construction possible. On September the 30th, it released a gargantuan 1,252-page draft rule that experts say is more burdensome, experts being the Breakthrough Institute, a nuclear lobbying group for goodness sakes, essentially copied and pasted the older prescriptive rules and then added new ones. In particular, it stuck with the as low as reasonably achievable standards for radiation. Poor nuclear. Which makes it economically impossible for small modular reactors to compete with fossil fuel. Not renewables, because they can't compete with it anyway, but fossil fuel. And they just had endless tax breaks heaved upon it and incentives. For every $1 million they spend, they get over 300,000 of it back. The reality of it is, nuclear has been given every opportunity conceivable, and they still can't get it together because of the inbreeding. And then you finally end up with this entitled generation, and that's what we're looking at right now. They think everything is going to happen when they wave their hands. So what they're saying, and we covered this last week again, a lot more detail, was that the new rules and regulations for the unicorn fabled small modular reactors are so strict, the industry can't build something that doesn't irradiate the shit out of you. Which is why all nuclear reactors are surrounded by farms. Which also reminds me, should university students work at Fukushima nuclear meltdown instead of the homeless victims? And I can't see why nuclear students don't work there. It doesn't make any sense. You think they would want to work there and give the homeless a day off. Okay, so last Thursday we only covered half of this story because that's all I had before it was time to go live. I just wanted to cover a tiny bit more of it. Dismantling, and it An extraordinary story and I mean that when I talk about, we cover a lot of stories. It's extraordinary to have anybody exposed to nuclear industry. And, of course, Samantha will be labeled anti-nuclear for the rest of her life. And the first two of these will just get you back up to speed, hopefully. Laid out over 6 kilometers, Sellafield, United Kingdom, and they had a meltdown in 1957 of a mixed oxide reactor with 8 million liters still each day hemorrhaging or flowing into the Atlantic Ocean from a mixed oxide fuel meltdown, folks. Sellafield is like a small town with nearly 1,000 buildings. Not like a small town, it's bigger than a small town. That forecast has aged poorly. The main reason power companies and governments aren't keener on nuclear power is not that activists are holding them back or that uranium is difficult to find, but that producing it safely is proven too expensive. That's why they were getting Russia to do it. That's why they have La Hague in France and Sellafield in the United Kingdom for decades and decades and decades producing the mixed oxide fuel. And it was illegal in Canada and it's illegal in the United States. But a group of the industry has been working diligently to change those legislations without a referendum or without informing the population. I got a cup of tea. I needed it desperately. Neutron salmon eggs on top of that, yeah. That forecast is aged poorly. The main reason power companies and governments aren't keener on nuclear power is not the activism, it's just as too expensive. The fractions of electricity generated by nuclear plants has slid steadily downwards from 25% in the 90s to 16% in 2020. And of the 5 stations in the United Kingdom, nuclear disease factories still hemorrhaging, flowing radiation into the farms that are surrounding them, only one will be running beyond 2028. But all of them will hemorrhage radiation from their fuel pools forever. The Hinkley Point C, the new nuclear plant, which is surrounded by farms, is being built in Somerset, they claim. It's very skeptical that actually is going to get built. Its cost is bloated to more than 25 billion. It's actually more than 32 billion sterlings. And the French are building it, so it ain't never going to get finished. Japan, it's Fukushima's trauma just a decade old. Announced it will commission new plants. Even as Sellafield is cleaning up after the first round of nuclear enthusiasm, another is getting underway. Any time spent in Sellafield is scored to a soundtrack of alarms, signals, the radiation trackers clipped to our protective overalls let off soft chirps, and the frequency varies as radiation levels changes. Before leaving every building, they ran a Geiger counter, which would have been just a gamma, always remembering to scan the tops of our heads and the soles of our feet, and they clacked like rattlesnakes. In other words, huge radiation numbers. At one spot, our trackers went mad. A pipe on the outside of the building had cracked, and the staff had planted 10-foot tall sheets of lead into the ground around it to shield people from the radiation. Well, it's airborne, so that's going to get rid of the shine from the particles, but it's airborne too. Particulates and atoms are just floating around freely. It's impossible not to breathe it in. A pipe on the outside of the building had cracked. I said that, Dana. To visit the reprocessing plant, which is closed down, but she went there when it was the last day, apparently. Until the previous day, technicians had called uranium plutonium as a spent fuel. the hot particles. Every second on each of the plant's 4 floors, I heard a beep, irregular pulse, reminding everyone that nothing is amiss. And every second on each of the plant's 4 floors, they heard a beep, a regular pulse. And if you don't hear it, I thought it was the other way around. I'm assuming the editors made a mistake on purpose with that one, right? We've got folks here who joined at 18, been here for 40 years, so they're 58 years old, working only in this building. Wow. Said Lisa Dixon. Her father is a welder there. Her husband is one of the firefighters stationed permanently on site. She meets aunts and cousins on her shift all the time. One big happy family that'll cut your throat to keep the jobs. I only ever saw a dummy of a spent fuel rod. The real thing would have to be a meter long, weighed 10 to 12 kilograms, and is emerged from a reactor run to temperatures of 2,800 degrees Celsius. Neutron generated more neutrons out of the uranium, which generated still more neutrons out of the other uranium atoms, and so on. The whole process begetting vast quantities of heat that turns water into steam and drives turbines. The UK's earliest reactor, a type called Magnox, were set up to harvest plutonium, which is named after the devil, for bombs, and electricity was a happy byproduct. That's true for all nuclear power plants, by the way. The government built 26 Magnox reactors across the country. They still haven't decommissioned a single one successfully. They've all been decommissioned now. They've been all turned into closed shutdown. They're awaiting decommissioning and demolition. And usually those reactors are going to let sit for 60 to 80 years, hemorrhaging radiation into the environment before they touch it. Turns out if you weren't looking to make plutonium nukes to blow up cities, Magnox was a pretty inefficient way to light up homes and power factories. So it was much more cost intensive because it was designed to do weapons, not power. You created the power as a byproduct of 1 million gallons a minute, 4,500 tons a minute to cool it. Barrels containing high-level radioactive nuclear waste stored in a pool in Sellafield. Well, how long before they rust through? And Sellafield got outdoor pools with no containment, no cover, that are 60 years old plus, and they don't know what's in it. For most of the latter half of the 20th century, one of Sellafield's chief tasks was reprocessing. Hello there, you're about to go live, that's okay.
Awesome, yeah, no, that's totally fine with me. I'm ready to go live.
Now you called in.
How's it going, Dana?
Good, thank you. You called in last year.
Yeah, I called in a while ago.
And you want to remind the audience what we were talking about?
Yeah, just, I used to do some work in the units here and abroad for KNDU. I still got some contacts, I guess you could say, who still do work here.
And you were talking about, and you're also talking about how some employees put radiation in coffee.
Oh yeah, it's almost sabotage.
To get at other people. I mean, that was quite the
eye
opener.
That happened a long time ago.
That's right.
That did happen, and then one of the examples was the faucet, the drinking taps.
Yep.
You couldn't drink out of them because those got accidentally contaminated with deuterium or whatever.
Yeah.
So with the heavy water, so they totally contaminated the drinking system. So there's in the plant there's all these drinking fountains and you can't drink from them.
Wow, that's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That it could actually find its way there, even with a bit of help. That's madness. You were talking today about a lack of qualified
Yeah, well, I was going to kind of mix that with another subject, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, you can give it a go for sure. Thank you.
Okay, well, here we had a doctor recently die suddenly, anesthesiologist, Dr. Yanni Husef. Now, that's quite a critical job. It takes quite a lot of training. I mean, it's not just your kind of registered nurse to start anesthetizing people. That's quite technical, whether you like them or not.
Yep.
And then also, so he's a pretty critical employee. Then you also have other critical employees, such as Adam Williams Exton. Now, there was no reason given for his sudden death, but he was the Director of Parliamentary Affairs for Health Canada. So this guy led your response for the COVID-19.
How old was he, you think?
He was 35 years old. And now, but they didn't, and so, he's kind of the guy coming up with policies that affect all Canadians here and there. And some of that would have been mandatory policies that have been instituted at critical infrastructure facilities, i.e. Nuclear plants. Which is
what's happening to the nuclear industry right now, is you were saying earlier.
They're suffering shortages. So, what I've been hearing is that some of these plants are really experiencing shortages of some of their critical employees. Now, some of their critical employees are what we used to, I don't know, I haven't been there for years, but we used to call them green man. So that would be your health and safety guy, the person who's in charge of controlling your dosage and monitoring you. Like one time we had a heavy water leak, and my green man grabbed me and basically dragged me out of the room because I didn't know what was going on. It didn't really seem to, just some water, big whoop. But no, it's not, right?
Wow, yeah, no. You can't smell it, right? There's no warning for you.
So, they had to make sure it wasn't, overly crazy. And then it took us about an hour. They cleaned it up, and then we were allowed back in. But
so people are not... The reason the plants are not having the job is something to do with the jab, apparently.
Well, their treatment for the virus, right?
They don't want the jab.
Well, you have to take it, if you're working there right now.
Right, and that's why they got a shortage, you thought?
Yeah, I'm starting to hear about this a bit. There's a lot of people, which,
Well, you actually were told that firsthand, right?
Pretty close to it, yes.
Yeah. Wow. And there's no reports of that, so...
Yeah, so, they're not any different than any other business who's experiencing a shortage of critical workers. I just kind of provided an example there of, here we're starting to see a shortage of critical doctors and things like that all the time now. And so if you can't get your surgery, it's not necessarily because of overcrowding, but also on the other side of the ability to provide for such services is disappearing. So the ability to provide maintenance for some of the plants is really taking a hit here too.
And that could lead into huge problems in the near future after not getting the work done. And then when they do maintenance, they got to bring in a lot of people to do any...
Well, you can't... How do you bring in people when,
exactly.
It takes years and years and years to train them? Whether you like these guys doing what they're doing or not, it doesn't really make a difference.
It takes a long time.
It needs to be maintained.
Yeah, it takes... Right? We were doing a story a little while ago. It takes at least 4 years to get the employee up to speed. That doesn't mean they're good, but it takes... That means they're kind of safe enough at that stage. But for 4 years, you got to babysit them the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some funny stuff, but they have a new rule about no assumptions. Because they had a gentleman get injured, and his coworker, I guess that he was training, during their investigation afterwards, because it took a while to get this guy the first aid team to get to him, because the guy that was working with him it kept dialing. I can't remember what the number is. It's something different. It's like 411 or something in the plant. It's been a long time since I was there.
Yeah. But
so he tried pressing 411 essentially 8 or 9 times, and it never called. But it was a rotary phone. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I know. So they have a new rule about don't assume that everybody else knows, right? So just for stuff like that, because, even if you spend 4 years training a guy, he might not know how to operate a rotary phone, which can lead to a massive problem.
Oh yeah, no. Well, like you say, they hide so much away, and Ontario is no exception, obviously, right? They just like the accidents they have each day that don't get reported to the population because they changed the rules so they didn't, right? Otherwise, people would be really concerned if they knew how many blunders happen every week.
Man.
Yeah.
I mean, well, why do you think Gentilly 2 is shut down?
Yeah, exactly.
What's funny is I had pictures of the scissor lift that was crushed by the fueling machine there, and those got magically disappeared from me. But
oh, is that right? Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, those got magically disappeared, but those were free floating around for a while. But yeah, they crushed the fueling machine into the scissor lift because the guy was wearing his headphones and decided he didn't need to have a spotter in the vault before they moved the fueling machine. Now that fueling machine was full of spent fuel rods. They had to get robotics in to go in there, and I think that after the end they said something about the heat water moderator being damaged, but they ripped the fueling machine ball screws out of the vault, so it was quite damaged, and that's why Gentilly 2 is shut down.
Oh, is that? I didn't realize that facet of it. Well, because they're not going to report on that stuff, obviously, right?
You can't. Once it's activated, it's activated.
And
so small things can lead to very major incidences, and when they're experiencing a shortage of workers, and they're offering pretty sizable bonuses for people to start working like serious amounts of overtime because they're already having a hard time with replacement.
Yeah, they don't care how much money it costs.
No, they don't. It's ridiculous. It's like you might as well just put an ATM in my bedroom.
Yeah, because they just don't care about money, right? They really don't. Hey, listen, do you know anything about Hanford? I meant to ask you that the last time.
Hanford? No.
Okay, just curious. You never know.
Yeah, no, I was only with the can-dos.
The tritium monsters. Man, they release so much tritium, it's absurd. It was 16 million curries a year just at a Pickering.
Like, no, they release so much, and so
they can't contain it.
There's 14. It's funny, from the treatment for that latest problem the world seems to be having, there's 14 known effects of taking the treatment for that, and so right now you're seeing a lot of fallout from that, or fall down suddenly from that. But it's funny that those same side effects are almost identical to the 1800 that you would find from long-term radiation poisoning.
Exposure, yeah. Once it's in your body is under siege for the rest of your life by white blood cells. Eventually, your body can't keep up with it. It's only like your system's only meant to make
right? You have a radioactive acquired immune deficiency syndrome.
And there's just 1,800 illnesses and diseases that'll manifest before the cancer, and cancer is coming, right? Because each atom in your body is under siege with white blood cells for the rest of your life. If you're young, 30 years later, it'll build a tumor around it. But that compromises your immune system.
What I see going through the obits is pretty bad. Like, you're seeing a lot of 40 and 50 and olds getting diagnosed immediately with stage 4 cancers, or going into the hospital and being like, I don't know why I have this lemon bump like under my rib cage, and it turns out they have like liver cancer, and they're dying immediately.
I've seen a lot of that, and I've heard a lot. There was one community just not too far from me. Last year, there was 5 people under 50 years of age in a week dropped dead in streets and back gardens and sheds.
It's
madness. That was radioactive induced, no doubt about it. Because
I know we've talked before, but Fukushima really. The Canadian government there said they stopped counting kind of after 4 or 5 years how many becquerels were in a cubic meter of water there off the coast of BC, and it quadrupled.
Yeah,
So it
like
went from 3 becquerels to 12 and then higher, and then they stopped reporting it.
Well, the rain, Health Canada admitted the rain was 300 times acceptable levels, which was 7,500 becquerels for iodine 131, and they called it minute. And then there was some media was trying to get samples tested at the universities and other agencies. They all refused to test the sample for radiation. Yet pre-Fukushima, they would have grabbed the money quicker than you could blink an eye. And they moved the radiation detecting equipment from Vancouver coastline 300 miles inland to the Okanagan. And so there was all kinds of just things were happening, but originally there was all this visual footage of the tsunami destruction for 680 kilometers of the coastline. Everybody was purposely, you get lost. That's very tragic. It's very visual. And the truth
there's only
is
3
terrible.
people in the world I know of that knew the significance of Fukushima the instant that happened. And, I'll tell my own horn, but I stood in front of the TV and told my mom, hey, look, Mom, they're lying to us,
Yeah.
They melted down. It's a full meltdown. Look, they blew out and up, right? Like, it's
Right.
crazy.
Oh, yeah. No, if it
You
was
knew
just
right off the
one.
bat.
If it was just one. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
You know who else read about that really recently? I read about was the CEO for General Electric. He was talking about how he saw Fukushima in the morning blow up, and then he said in the documentary I was watching, he said, I knew immediately that the world was going to be different from there on in, basically saying it's over, right?
Yeah,
And he had to pull himself together to go glad hand because, he's the CEO.
Yeah.
Business has to keep going. So he said there was quite the turnaround from watching the extinction of the Earth happen and having to go glad hand.
He was in shock.
Yeah.
Yeah, real shock too, right? Because the fallout is the fallout is horrific. It's a horrific plume. It was like there's so much already going on, but this was a pulse, and it was catastrophic. Where the northern hemisphere was immediately American coastline, Canadian coastline. That was a brutal, sustained. We had a study out of Ottawa, 220 million atoms of iodine 129, which means you would extrapolate all kinds of. And the fact that they were even reported on it.
Yeah, no, what they reported on is already enough to scare the.
Any academic in the business would have known immediately, but when he seen that number, it was going to be saturated with everything else. We got done dirty for so long. When Fukushima happened, they went into full cover-up mode. It was really, there was some resistance, right? In Canada, as you know, for the first couple of years, scientists weren't allowed to give an interview without getting permission from Stephen Harper's office, his personal office. And they were marching in the streets with pots and pans, banging them. The scientists were and academics because they weren't allowed to do interviews, didn't know what the frig was going on. But
what blows me away is like right off the top. I mean, if you take, I think in the world there's 400,000 tons of spent fuel, which isn't really spent fuel, but it's just lit off. But it's still only 99. It's only 1% used, and then they throw it in the water for 10 million years. But
right.
There's 400,000 tons of spent fuel around, as far as I can recall, to my best knowledge.
It's all split into atoms,
going on for the next 100 million years. But there was 1 ton that got spent. There was 1 ton that got lit up at Chernobyl. But Fukushima, I don't know if you have the numbers on that or not, but it was 1,800 tons between the spent fuel pools and the units themselves that got blown up and out and blown up and down into the underneath, right? So it was 1,800 tons.
Well, I haven't got the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I did have new information today talking about, and I'll cover it a little bit later. There was 3,450 assemblies, and these just that much alone would have been catastrophic. But that was each building in the fuel pools.
Right.
My God, man, right? The common spent fuel pool was wiped out too. We believe reactor 6 was wiped out, the fuel pool on that one, because they blotted everything out. But definitely common spent fuel.
Did you ever find out anything about the processing facility there where they were doing the enrichment just a couple miles away?
I missed that first part.
Did you ever find out how much they had at that processing facility where they were enriching it just a few miles away?
No.
Okay.
I'm not familiar. Off the top of my head.
Yeah, that was a military installation a few miles away for another country for their missile system.
Were they hauling that at a chemical plant?
I don't know. They could have labeled it a chemical plant, but I just know it was
it was military.
Facility.
It was military grade. I know they were going to burn barrels of it after Fukushima. Try wrapping your mind around that one. Yeah. In the incinerators.
Yeah, well, they dump it. They get rid of it. You know what's funny is they never bury any of it except for that one site there. I can't remember where they had that truck fire apparently, but they never actually bury it. They always put it like right at ground level so it can be easily accessed.
Well, they talk about down blending it, where they mix it with gravel, so you can't extract easily anyway the plutonium in large quantities from it. This is what they're shipping from the legacy laboratories, national laboratories, to the WIP, New Mexico.
Yeah, that's it, yep.
Right, and they were talking about down blending it. But when they caught fire back in 2014, at that point then they were only supposed to be shipping gloves and radioactive hammers and stuff like that. And the fire they had was catastrophic. So they were installing real high-level legacy from the Manhattan Project waste, right? Yeah. No, that was madness. Okay, go ahead, yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, it was in the news there, all those people that were having cancer at that one school in the States there. And it's like, that's so easy to look up. There had to be a Manhattan refining factory real nearby.
There was. The river that runs past the school floods regularly. And so the old Manhattan Project site that was there also was acknowledged had contaminated it, but the sediment apparently had covered it over enough on the floor of the river that it was... just as long as you don't disturb it, right, it'll be okay. But then when you had the floods, it got disturbed. And there was a lot of homes, too, that got flooded and were certified to go back in, but nobody checked for radiation. So all these years later, finally they checked, and sure enough...
they finally cracked that one. But was that the same river where they were dredging after that potash factory, had a leak or whatever, and then they started dredging it and went through the
cesium barrels. The cesium barrels. Wasn't that Idaho National Laboratory or Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory around those rivers? There was one of the national laboratories were right on that river. And they admit, candidly, that they dumped barrels into it during the Manhattan Project because back then the war effort was more important, right? They took it out on a barge on the river and dumped it. And all these years later, they started trying to widen the river up. Nobody told them. They started picking up.
And the dredger guys were dropping dead.
Oh yeah,
they were crazy cancers and dying, and they were still dredging it.
Well, they were bringing
It's okay, don't worry about it.
The barrels were coming up, and they were putting them on deck, and they were cracked open. And man, no, the industry. When you look at, like you say, you have to sit here for several days straight just to get through all the cover-ups, and then if you go to all the admitted accidents, that's going to take you another couple of weeks to walk through all that. Now, the industry is...
Then they downplay the scale of it. Like you said, they'll measure for, iodine 121 or whatever it is.
Something that's not there,
there's so many others. If you're finding that, there's got to be 100 others because they all are on a different... When they split, they all release a little bit different wavelength of energy. And so unless you're tuned to that wavelength, you're not going to see it.
And like my Geiger counter is only going to find gamma and very few of it, right? It's not going to find plutonium or uranium or americium or neptunium or anything else. Okay, listen, I'm going to have to let you go because we got a lot to get through, but that's awesome, man. News that we got some breaking news for a change. It's appreciated. Give us a call
No worries.
anytime you feel like you got any good tidbits like that. That's a lot of fun.
Will do.
Okay, my friend. Thank you. Nothing else you wanted to
Have a
add,
good
was
evening.
it? I got to watch out. Was there anything
Okay,
else you
bye.
want to throw out there? Okay, good stuff. Yeah, bye-bye. And this is from somebody who worked in the industry years ago. Last time he called in, he was talking about how some employees, to get back at the other employees, had put radioactive material in the coffee pots. That's some kind of whole different evil right there, folks. Sellafield has 60,000 tons of spent fuel, more than half of which is fuel reprocessed anywhere in the world. They take fuel around the world, basically. And the rods arrive in Sellafield after usually coming by ocean and train, stored in flask or in pools, each weighing 50 tons and standing 1.5 meter tall. 50 ton. And the flasks are cast from a single ingot of stainless steel. So when they gouge it out and make a cast out of it, 50 tons is left over. So it weighs 100,000 pounds. It's madness, isn't it? And the walls are a third of a meter thick, so 30 plus centimeters thick. So they're a foot thick. It's really something. The rods are cooled in pools of water between 90 and 250 days. That's the ones that are transferred. Then they're skinned of their cladding and dissolved in boiling nitrous acid. I think that's at 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And from that concoction, technicians separate out uranium, plutonium, technicians. Powdery like Cummins when it's in the right environment. The cycle from acid to power lasts up to 36 hours, and it hasn't improved a lot in efficiency in all these years they've been there. And the only change now, they've been, Sellafield in La Hague in France, and Sellafield in the United Kingdom have been accused of contaminating the Arctic and Europe with fuel reprocessing facilities, and certainly the coast of Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. And on top of that, Sellafield has a ongoing mixed oxide fuel meltdown that's hemorrhaging 8 million liters a day into the Atlantic Ocean. That's poured over a melted mixed oxide fuel reactor. So it's insidiously evil. And the only change was dwindling numbers of rods coming in as the Magnox reactors closed everywhere. The reprocessing plants in was always coming. The pipes and steam lines, many from the 1960s, kept fracturing. And Dixon's team was running out of spare parts that aren't manufactured anymore. And since December 2019, they've had 16 straight days only of running the plant at one time. They got to close it down after 16 days is the most it run in the last couple of years to conduct repairs and clean the machinery, take them apart. So this place should never be running, obviously. And so then at last the reprocessing plant will be placed on fire watch. So people are walking around looking for fires that are breaking out at a mixed oxide production facility. Is just walking around in that environment is absurd. But otherwise left alone for decades for its radioactivity to dwindle, particle by particle. Well, everything is vented. If you don't vent it, you won't be able to walk around in the building. So everything is vented into the environment. This is why they're surrounded by farms. And how long are you going to sit there and take this from the industry? Let them poison you in your supermarkets and in your communities. But I mean, these places are surrounded by farms. You know, if you should be frightened to death to go to a supermarket after what the nuclear industry's got done. That's one of the scary statements imaginable. Like malign glitter. Radioactivity gets everywhere, turning much of what it touches into nuclear waste. Oh, just the X-rays, the neutron bombardments, the gamma shines will radiate everything else. The humblest items, a paper towel or a shoe cover used for just a second in a nuclear environment, can absorb radioactivity. And this stuff is graded as low level. It can be encased in blocks of cement and left outdoors. When in doubt, a popular phrase in the nuclear waste industry goes, when in doubt, grout. Grout is like a cement, right? Even a paper towel needs a couple of 100 years to cool down and become safe. Well, it's never safe. Even radioactive lead is considered radioactive lead. A moment of use, centuries of quarantine. Radiation tends to twist time out of all proportion. And on the other hand, high-level waste, the byproduct of reprocessing, is so radioactive, they have 500 security guards at La Hague in France, that the containers will give off heat for thousands of years. Giving off heat is splitting the atoms, and if they're in any human environment, they're vented. It too will become harmless over millions of years, but the scale of time is planetary, not human. The number of radioactive atoms in the kind of iodine found in nuclear waste byproducts halves every 16 million years. So that's 160 million years. Some say it's got 20 half-lives. So 320 million years. Planning for the disposal of high-level waste has to take into account the drift of the continents in the next ice age. This is significant because responsibly, you got to think about all that. You got to get it out of the environment so it's not splitting atoms into your precious biosphere anymore. And all fuel pools, there's around 1,000 of them worldwide, are hemorrhaging atoms, flowing atoms into the environment 24 hours a day that never disappear. It's like we're all in a big box and you got a nuclear power plant hemorrhaging into your environment 24 hours a day. Eventually, it's fatal to everything with replicating cells. Waste can travel incognito, the fatal effect. Radioactive atoms carried by wind or water enter living bodies, insects, birds, animals, mammals, bacteria, fungus, riddling them with cancer and ruining them inside out. During the 1957 reactor fire at Sellafield, a radioactive plume, it burned continuously. It's still 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging into the ocean or pouring over it. It's still splitting the atoms. So the physical fire went out, but the chain reaction basically never goes away because it melted down. So a radioactive plume of particles poured from the top of a 400-foot chimney. And living bodies, they put there, forget to put with the S rather. A radioactive plume of particles poured from the top of the chimney. A few days later, the particles are detected in Germany and Norway, which means the whole country is now covered for sure. Near Sellafield, radioactive iodine found its way into the grass of meadows where dairy cows graze, so the sample of milk taken in the weeks after the fire showed 10 times the permissible levels, which means you can't live there or breathe the air there too, or drink the water forever. The government had to buy up the milk from the farmers in a 500 square kilometre around Sellafield and dumped it in the Irish Sea. But that meant you should have left your communities too. Radiation doesn't just look for farms. It means you can't breathe the air, and that's true today. You can see the Queen over there, look. From the outset, the authorities hedged and fibbed. For 3 days, no one in the area was told about the gravity of the accident that was taking place, or even advised to stay indoors or shut their windows, so their houses were permanently contaminated forever. Workers at Sellafield reporting their alarming radiation exposure to their managers were persuaded that they should walk it off on the way home. So complete contempt for life. Because they couldn't get another job like that anywhere, so they decided it's better to poison everybody, that way they still got their jobs. A government inquiry, but because they're going to get sick and bring it home to their children too, they're idiots. A government inquiry was held, but its report was not released until 1988. So 30 years they hid the report. So few people knew that the fire dispersed not just radioactive iodine, but also polonium, far more deadly. No. This was hemorrhaging everything. Zirconium, xenon, americium, neptunium, strontium. Of course, uranium, plutonium, not just polonium, but plutonium. The estimated toll of the cancer deaths has been revised again, to suggest that the only adverse side effect is going to be cancer is unbelievably dishonest. There's heart problems, liver problems, fatal too. Lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. And major spikes in all. There's, these are major ones they're looking for, but they're not going to tell you about. Sellafield took his president's name in 1981, in part to raise the old name wind scale, and they went out, jacked people out of the theaters to go into the nuclear meltdown and push the fuel rods out of the reactor. They didn't go to universities, and they didn't go to other nuclear power plants. They went to the theaters. Just give me a second, see if I can find it there. Yeah, there we go. Let me check the volume before I jump. I'll adjust the volume in real time for you here.
The police from the factory had turned up looking for volunteers, and they'd brought a bus, and they decided the best way to get the volunteers was to go to the cinema and volunteer the back two rows at the show to go into the factory to, as it turned out, to help push the fuel rods out of the reactor.
So they went to the theater and kidnapped the people in the back rows of the theater in 1957. And in those days, only the poor people would have been sat in the back rows, right? The rich were sat up front. They didn't go to the universities and get volunteers or other nuclear power plants or military. No. They went and jacked people from the back rows of the theater. This is why it was covered up for those 30 years and then hid away again. Fear that some radioactivity is leaking out of the facility in some fashion has never entirely vanished. Really? From a nuclear meltdown? I'm shocked. In 1983, a Sellafield pipeline discharged 0.5 ton of radioactive solvent into the sea. British Nuclear Fuel Limits, which are still in business, which is the government, was fined £10,000. The government was fined it. I noticed they weren't laughing about that one after. Around the same time, so there's no incentive not to be murderous, right? Around the same time, a documentary crew found higher incidences than expected of leukemia among the children. A government study concluded the radiation wasn't to blame. Perhaps the study suggested leukemia had an undetected infectious cause. We got studies where they try to blame it on the common cold. There was another story where they tried to blame it on population mixing. But anything but the nuclear industry. You're talking about cancer clusters in children right by the nuclear reprocessing facility in Columbia. And they were trying to blame it on the common cold. They actually produced studies saying it was probably from a common cold that caused the cancers among all the children living downhill from the reprocessing facility, eating from the local farms surrounding the mixed oxide fuel nuclear meltdown site. It was no secret that Sellafield kept on site huge stashes of spent fuel rods, waiting to be processed. This was lucrative work, they claim. An older reprocessing plant on site earned $9 billion over its lifetime. Basically, you're talking 60 years, which is an insignificant amount of money when you compare it to the damage for the whole planet. Half of it from customers overseas. The ultimate in evil, by the way. And the pursuit of commercial reprocessing turned Sellafield into a similar French site, La Hague de facto nuclear waste dumps. Like I say, La Hague got 500 security guards, armed security guards. The industry looks for the worst thing to do, and then that's what they're going to do. No matter how much money it costs, that's what they're going to do. Sellafield now requires $2 billion a year to maintain. And what looks like a smart line of business in the 1950s now turned into anything but. And with every passing year, maintaining the world's costliest rubber dump. Well, this is a hemorrhaging radiation. And it's surrounded by farms. And the expenditures rise because structures will age, growing more rickety, more prone to mishaps. In 2005, in an older reprocessing plant at Sellafield, 83,000 liters of radioactive acid dripped out of a ruptured pipe. And you can never put the genie back in the bottle on top of it. The plant had to be shut down for 2 years. The cleanup cost was $300 million. And cancer and heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory problems. The place is surrounded by farms, folks. On purpose, so they can poison you in your supermarkets. Almost all nuclear plants are just horrific. The year before the pandemic, a sump tank attached to a waste pond at a nuclear plant. A waste pond. Do you got a waste pond at your property? Sprang a leak and had to be grouted shut. Sprang a leak. Well, when you got to grout something, right, it's because it's too radioactive to get close to for 60 or 70, 80, 100 years or longer. Around the same time, an old crack in a waste silo opened up again, a waste silo. This is not farming silos we're talking about, despite the fact they're using that cliches. It posed no health risk, Sellafield, the scumbags determined, so it was still dripping liquid into the ground when they visited. And 6 years ago, the snake creators, they had this mechanical snake, because there's many places you can't go near in Sellafield, even today in 1,000 years. A 10-story building called B204 had been Sellafield's first reprocessing facility. And in 1973, a rogue chemical. Now, chemicals are not rogue. It's the people that handle it. A rogue employee caused a chemical reaction, filled the premise with radioactive gas, which means you can never go back. 34 workers were contaminated. The building was promptly closed down, and the communities all around it would have got lethal doses. Gas, fuel rods, and radioactive equipment were all left in place in a sealed room known as cells. They're not cells. They're radiation released into the environment. Calling them a cell, which turned so lethal, humans haven't entered them since. And like the first part of that story I done last Thursday, it was just like mind-blowing. And then when you get the rest of it, this was just a single article about a single place. You're going to have to look at that information the same way now you got to apply it to Hanford and all the nuclear laboratory sites. And you got to expand it worldwide. Japan turns back to nuclear power to tackle energy crisis. It's the longest, slowest, most expensive thing to implement. And so they're using the word energy crisis as to justify nuclear power. And it's totally dishonest and completely, utterly, criminally dishonest to do it that way. But that's what they decided to do, and they're doing this worldwide. They're using these exact same connotations. There's hard cases, let's put it that way. Japan is just a freaking nightmare. This place is an unbelievable nightmare to the entire planet now. Public opinion has been hostile towards nuclear energy ever since. A meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi plant. Now the mood has shifted due to soaring energy costs caused by embargoes and no way to replace the commodities that they have an embargo against. Now the only countries they're hurting is their own country. They're not hurting Russia, just sells it to somebody else. The prolonged war in Ukraine and repeated power crunches in both summer and winter. That's because Japan had 11 years to build another power supply and refused to do it. They waited until now, and then now they're going to start up nuclear. Why did they wait 11 years? They shut down 54 nuclear power plants and didn't replace them because they didn't want something that would compete with nuclear. Governments across Europe and Asia are also extending the life of their aging nuclear fleet. And I mean, they'll usually bring up Germany, which gave an extension of till April, a few months down the road. It's not an extension. But the media is trying to use it as justification that nuclear has some deeming qualities. So go back to 2014 August. There was multiple systems that they allegedly tried at Fukushima. They didn't try it. They built them there to make you think that nothing was getting into the environment. That's why they built the tanks, right? It was to trick you to be complacent, to think there was no releases into the ocean. And there was nothing but releases. There's no way to contain it. I showed you at the beginning the destroyed buildings. It was all said and done in the first couple of weeks. This is meant to manipulate the future generations. TEPCO to abandon the Riva, which was French's system. The system in August 2014 has been unused and kept out of operation. Then the Alps system, 2014, has yet to function reliably, which they're talking almost 3.5 years after a nuclear meltdown. There's still no water filtration. And so there's no way to store this much. You can fill up all those tanks 6 times a day with a single reactor. When they melt down, they're going to need just as much water. So the advanced liquid processing facility, not only that, there's parts of the site they can't even go to because of lethal doses. And so when you're talking, some of these numbers were 100 million becquerels per cubic centimeter in just sludge. You're never going to get close. That's a lethal dose just running past that stuff by the liter, say, right? TEPCO says groundwater bypass operation. The promise to install $1 billion fence was never happened. The ice wall is not working. So everything that they allegedly tried was only really meant to pacify you and get you to stop looking, stop thinking, and to protect the nuclear industry at all costs. It's better to murder all of the species and all of humanity than it is to smear the name of the nuclear industry. That's how they see it, see? U.S. Senate passes a record $858 billion Defense Act. $858 billion. $858 billion to the misery machine with over 800 bases worldwide. It's so stupid it defies any kind of rational. The vote meant Congress has passed the NDAA every year since 1961. Every single year they passed the military whatever it wanted. Now it's completely out of control. Because it is one of the few major bills that always pass, lawmakers use the NDAA as a vehicle for ranges of initiatives. So they know that's going to pass every year because it's doing it since 1961. So anything they want passed, they'll just tack onto it. Yeah, that's a real Congress you got down there. That's something to be proud of right there. It also provided Ukraine with at least $800 million additional security assistance, whatever that means. And includes a range of provisions to strengthen Taiwan. Right? Because they use it to spy digitally on China, which is right across the strait and is connected by line of sight, right? And tensions with China, including billions of dollars in security assistance, fast-tracked weapons procurement for Taiwan. Taiwan, you can give Taiwan everything it wants, but it can't defend against China. It's a little island with nowhere to go and hide. China could squash it any time they want. Initiative to support, they just don't like the idea, and Americans have set up all kinds of shops there. Initiative to support marine industry ahead of nuclear plant water discharge. Let me remind you, water discharge. They've already buried the planet constantly in radioactive fallout. They've already buried the oceans in constant emissions. And they want you to think that the only thing you got to worry about is in tanks. Right? That's the game. They don't want you to think about what they've already got done. This is day 19 after it happened. You really think that's stopped? You really think that's gone away? You really think that's not wiping out all the species and your loved ones? And so this is proper. There's a lot of people bought into it. Well, all the media never bought into it. They're just going to promote it. The government plans to launch an initiative to increase the consumption of radioactive food from 5 coastal prefectures. Events will be held nationwide to promote the safety of the radioactive products and radioactive processed seafood from prefectures and brutally radioactive prefectures of Iwate, Miyagi, Fukushima, Ibaraki, and Chiba. These prefectures are unbelievably radioactive. Food was banned from 14 of those 14 prefectures. But 55 countries, not Canada, but 55 countries. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days. So Japan can only ship it to Canada, they couldn't ship it anywhere else. So the worst of the worst radioactive food went to all of our supermarkets. Well, unless you're Canadians, on your shelves and in your fridges, deep fridges. Not only that, they're so incredibly arrogant, they grew and harvested food right alongside the 1-ton bags of radiation. That doesn't make you try to get educated, try to get, not talking to the regulars, obviously, but that doesn't, if you're new to this conversation, that should really concern you. Because you can't avoid eating or drinking it, because they're shipping it into your countries worldwide now. They removed restrictions for most of the countries in less than a decade. But 100 organizations, financial institutions, trading companies, local governments are expected to participate in the public-private program to manipulate the population into eating food if misleading information. And so misleading misinformation is anything that contradicts what they're saying. Like the reactors melted down and released large quantities across the country. or that the food was banned in those same prefectures and many, many others because it was warranted. It's misleading information about the treated water spreads following the planned discharge. When the tanks are full of natural water, if you fill the tanks up at 2 liters or 2 sieverts per liter, you can't build another tank on site. And you can't, the tanks each reactor needed 4,500 tons a minute before it melts down. Once it melts down, you can't recover the water. You're pouring it into a nuclear meltdown. They want you to believe, since 2015 on, that the whole time, but this was officially changed in 2015, they didn't want you to believe after that everything went into the tanks, nothing went into the environment. And that it's safe to eat the food grown right alongside the 1-ton bags of radiation. Should tell you even more than you ever wanted to know. However, the planned release has raised concerns about the possibility of harmful rumors. Harmful rumors. So you're not allowed to have a dissenting opinion, even if it's warranted. The possibility of harmful rumors. In other words, they want you to claim that there's no adverse side effects. This was a German model for 6 years. This was just not the airborne. This is just going into the ocean, the dispersal, based on the original numbers that were released. This is a Neptunian 239 dispersal, which decays after 40 days or something into plutonium 238. There was also plutonium 239 models. These are all from the government, covering the whole planet. But they want you to think that it's all in the tanks. Mothering a movement, notes from India's longest anti-nuclear struggle. So they were protesters, and this guy, silver-beard guy, said, "You are cunning." He grinned at one of us as we waited for our bus at the only tea stall in the small village near Kanyakumari, the southernmost tip of mainland India. His big bright eyes didn't scan the others. "You look innocent. You believe whatever people say." We hadn't expected to be so publicly psychoanalyzed. The epicenter of India's longest anti-nuclear struggle led up to the commissioning of the first nuclear reactor in 2013, and they witnessed brutal police actions there. And we covered that, actually. Hang on. So they were going to build this nuclear plant in southern India. Let me see if I can find the story here. There it is. 9,000 I must have missed it. Hang on. Missed the headline of it. I thought I had it there. 7 years later, this was 2019, the lives of 9,000 people booked for sedition in Kudankulam. It was 10,000 originally. They were beaten up by the police with sticks. Their crime, participating in a peaceful protest against establishing a nuclear power plant there and charged with sedition. So they couldn't get a bank account, they couldn't go to school, they couldn't get a job, they couldn't leave the country, and blah, 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 blah. They're prisoners for almost a decade now. Back to that story, the elderly gent who trumpeted himself as a free thinker kept going, these nuclear activists, they should be hanged. What are we supposed to do when Pakistan has 10 times more nuclear weapons? We need to build the bombs, and we need those nuclear plants, even if they do some harm to us, okay? Yet in 2011, 2012, Kudankulam and its nearby village had commanded significant media attention, putting aside their caste and religious differences. The locals put up a remarkable non-violent resistance against the nuclear establishment. We want to find out what happened to the movement a decade later. All of this area falls under what is called emergency planning zone, a 16-kilometer 16-kilometer radius around the nuke plants that would need evacuation in case of a disaster. A 16-kilometer radius. Well, radiation doesn't stop at 16 kilometers, and there's no way you're getting out, and you ain't going back. Our fellow passengers included non-locals who formed the bulk of the workforce at the plant. When we do not get off at either of the stations, the victory of Atom Town. Victory of Atom. Victory of the Atom. That's what the name translated into. That's the ultimate in brainwashing right there, isn't it? The name of your community translates into victory of the atom. A gated community for staff and their families, and the plants from 7 kilometers away. The few remaining people on the bus started eyeing us like they were bad people. Once at the busy main market, our local guide and a few other men quickly whisked us away to a house where we scheduled to interview women activists. This is people going there 10 years later to see what happened. Here's what happened to them. They went there to interview women involved in the 2012 protest. Before they can start a conversation, a man in a striped blue shirt asked us to write down our names and contact details. It was the Criminal Investigation Department, he replied softly. When we asked why, he is a policeman, he's just doing his job, another man chimed in matter-of-factly. Just doing his job. The sprawling nuclear plant across the road, so the police are there to protect the nuclear industry from publicity. Wow. Reaches in far into the lives of the people. Police surveillance is part and parcel of the architecture of the nuclear establishment in India. It's the largest nuclear power plant, housing 2 Russia's reactors. It reaches the sprawling nuclear plant across the road, reaches far into the lives of the people. Police surveillance is part and parcel of the architecture. Department of the Atomic Energy, which oversees all things nuclear, makes it easy to indulge in wild speculations. Right from its inception in 1954, the Department of Atomic Energy had been notoriously opaque, with little independent or public scrutiny, and prone to misinformation and grandiose statements. While the U.S. launched its Atoms for Peace in 1953, India's was the atoms in the service of the nation. It was revolting, isn't it? That's the nuclear industry. They're extremely well at being revolting. In 1974, the Department of Atomic Energy tested nuclear weapons in the guise of a peaceful nuclear program, calling them peaceful nuclear explosives. Peaceful nuclear detonations. The radioactive fallout is the same as the nuclear war. Things have been equally farcical in the case of civilian nuclear energy program, where in the name of national security, Department of Atomic Energy refused to share details about basic public matters like energy cost and nuclear safety. And that the Department of Atomic Energy refused to share details at all. Even though the Department of Energy, Atomic Energy, is currently and consistently decades behind in meeting its own projections, and it still proclaims a 50-fold increase in nuclear power by 2050. But it's already decades behind in meeting its fabled projections, right? Because they just tell you they're going to give you everything on the planet, and if you let them put nuclear there, and then they shoot at you if you come near the fence after. The message is loud and clear. The future is nuclear, and only fools worry about the past or the present. This was a former president. If we say anything against the plant, they'll file a case against us, the police, said a young woman who teaches science at a nearby school. We don't have permission to talk about the issue with students. So even the schools are not allowed to talk about nuclear. What do you got? You've got nothing to hide. Why are you so secretive? We do not have any facilities. We have long power cuts. They're right by the plant. We receive drinking water only once every 10 days. And there are all sorts of diseases. And now it's not possible to remove the disease factory nuclear power plant. Outsiders have all permanent positions there. And so why should the people who live in the metropolitan India receive the benefits of nuclear energy while the people in the community take on all the risk? And many who protested can't get jobs there. It was a waste, the teacher concluded. People have accepted they must live with the diseases. People have accepted that they must live with the nuclear diseases caused by living next to a nuclear disease factory known as a nuclear power plant. That's just like wow stuff, isn't it? I got a poll. Should nuclear university students work at the Fukushima nuclear meltdowns instead of the homeless victims that work, the destitute, the immigrants who don't speak the language? After 11 years, nuclear scientists have never worked there, nuclear students have never worked there, nuclear academics have never worked there. They're just evil all around, aren't they? The guy who runs his shop opposite the plant joked, I don't know about nuclear waste. The government hasn't even been able to do anything about the sewage near the market, let alone the nuclear waste. And a blurry man who was a small-time politician added, we have not had a single evacuation drill or disaster training exercise in all these years, and we don't know what to do if anything happens. In other words, they're barbarizing the local community. Usually they shower them with free money, right? And opportunities. But they protested, and so the police are permanently there to harass them. Jaywalking on streets with no cars. The other men nodded and awkwardly laughed. Earlier this year, the Kudankulam village council passed a mostly symbolic resolution against the upcoming away from reactor nuclear storage, citing concerns the area would become a radioactive dumping ground away from the reactor nuclear storage. You're talking about India, where the streets down there with children deformed because they dump so much into the rivers, the drinking water rivers. A few days after the Fukushima accident, a senior Department of Atomic Energies announced that there was no nuclear accident or incident in Fukushima, instead claiming that it was purely a chemical reaction and not a nuclear emergency. We've seen that worldwide. It wasn't just India. But it's always really quick in India. Such technocratic stonewalling, typical of the Department of Atomic Energy, did little late anxiety to people living around the plant. And following a test run at the nuclear plant in 2011, involved generating high-pressure steam to check safety mechanisms, residents started protesting non-violently. The Department of Atomic Energy sought to further counter the heightened fear of locals with high-handedness and by flexing the scientific, economic, and legal authority. The former president refused to meet those in the village with anti-nuclear sentiments, declaring instead that history is not made by cowards. Sheer crowd cannot bring about change. Only those who think everything is possible can create history and bring about changes. Really poisoning everybody in your country permanently is something to be admired, apparently. Months later, tired of intransient protesters, the state enlisted the help of the Indians' leading mental health hospitals to counsel them. Meanwhile, the police and additional security agencies dealt with descending locals in their own style, and by the first anniversary of nonviolent protests in August 2012, nearly 7,000 had been accused of sedition and waging war against the state. Sedition! Because you protested a nuclear plant, a disease factory, which was the moral and ethical thing to do. And many still refuse to forgive the state for how they responded to the protest. It was violent against peaceful protest. They beat the shit out of all the protesters and destroyed them now for almost a decade. Mildred, a 50-year-old leader of the protest with dozens of legal cases against her, recounted the day they marched on a nuclear plant in September 2012. We were frightened by the gunfire. I was in front with the women and the hot gas fell, which was the tear gas, between their legs. We couldn't breathe. We couldn't see for many days. They captured 6 other women, but I escaped by swimming into the sea. Marching on the plant was a last-ditch effort to stop the loading of the nuclear fuel rods and the commissioning of its first reactor. And they actually slept on the beaches at night and went back and protested in the morning when the sun rose up. Bless their hearts, eh? Amazing. Amazing people. We decided to protect the village by destroying the roads. So we rang the church bells to warn people about the arrival of the police. We were hurt in our hearts, Mildred continued. And throughout the state could only see the irrationality and the naive of this resistance. And the Prime Minister and the Home Minister alleging that foreign NGOs were instigating the locals against the disease factory. However, most apprehensions of the women activists we met were grounded in personal experiences and knowledge of diseases. The mock evacuation made real the possibility that they might have to leave the area sooner or later, which was not acceptable to the women, for for them their land is not a fungible good. It's not something they can trade. No promise of a job or housing elsewhere was worth it. We long for this place. It's everything for us. Their homes are there. Their graveyards are there. Their heritage is there. Our lives depend upon the sea. It's our life, our mother. That's the truth. That's so awesome. Here's what a nuclear accident is like. Invisible blanket of death covers everything. Nuclear expert in Japan, plutonium is everywhere. It's everywhere after Fukushima reactors exploded. It's being redeposited in unanticipated locations. And the black radioactive dust just wherever you go, it's running right into the Pacific Ocean. Top official agrees to public downplay Fukushima. 80% of the milk samples in Florida had significant cesium-137. Everybody on Earth has been irradiated by Fukushima radioactive fallout. Shocking new study reveals true extent of the global impact. Well, everybody and every insect and every bird and every animal and every human. Scientists are only just now confirming far-reaching effects. Scientists. U.S. states hit with extremely large peaks of Fukushima radioactive material. Significant amount of plutonium was released for months. And that the radioactivity from the plant was measured globally and blanketed the entire northern hemisphere. Oh, they hit you so many ways. It was really something, right? It was blanketed the northern hemisphere. This is a model from NOAA's of the radioactive fallout. It was only based on venting, but you couldn't vent. You couldn't have vented it because it was so much. So this model is, I'm going to speed it up, is based on 40 days. So that's 40 days. The whole northern hemisphere was blanketed by radioactive fallout. This was one of the studies. This one was out of Ottawa, showing 220 million atoms per liter of rainfall of iodine 129. These are catastrophic numbers. Transported rapidly to Canada, United States. Elevated levels continued for many months. Oh, it's never going to go away. But the continuous plume coming is what they're talking about. Rain with 20 million particles of radioactive iodine, that's from Western Canada, by a degenerate Simon Fraser University, Chris Rosa. What a disgusting maggot he turned out to be. Plutonium everywhere. It's everywhere. And if you're getting, if you're getting 20 million particles of radioactive iodine 1 per liter and 220 million atoms 129 per liter, there's zero possibility you weren't getting plutonium. And plutonium was everywhere in Japan, is everywhere wherever that plume went. Radiation experts terrifying how the Pacific ecosystem has collapsed since Fukushima. Plutonium and uranium suspected of spreading throughout the food chain. Japan journalist, plutonium escaped Fukushima's reactors as a gas. It was a colossal 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Can't be detected with Geiger counters. Terrible things are looming for the children. They must be evacuated, yet nothing's done. It's a criminal nation. Well, I mean, that's being pretty polite, calling it a criminal nation. It's infinitely worse than a criminal nation. Nuclear 2.0 set for key net zero role. Nuclear 2.0. This is the newest, greatest, latest, fanciest fuel rods. Because now they need the high assay fuel rods. They're like 15, 16% uranium, reclaimed uranium, mixed oxide fuel. These are very high numbers, folks. In order for the fabled small modular reactor to work. But the problem with the story is that the small modular reactor, the rules and regulations that he came up with, means you can't be allowing radiation to escape, which means you can't build a reactor because they're always hemorrhaging radiation. This is the remains of reactor 3. This was a drone pictures. There's 760 or so of them got released 2 years ago in January, after the 10th, just after the 10th year, and just before the 10th anniversary. And these were drone shots, and when you zoomed in, you noticed all the plants were pixelated out. And up there, way over there in the corner, you know what? Oh, I screwed that up. Hang on. I'll put myself up there for you. If I don't get... That's the common spent fuel pool. That's the same height as the first floor of the reactor buildings. That's right behind reactor 4. Why was that pixelated? The common spent fuel pool had 6,375 spent fuel assemblies. Well, that's what it was supposed to hold. It had a lot more than that because you don't have a repository in Japan, see? And each of one of these assemblies is 1,800 pounds. Fukushima radioactive inventory is 30 to 40 times as high as in Chernobyl, was one expert was saying. It turns out it's much worse than that. So what? This is the common spent fuel pool. Why is it all pixelated? And why did they release those pictures after 10 years? And behind it, you can see there are transport truck containers all piled up because the wave ran right through it, right through this place. And there's so much energy, you can see all the transport truck containers piled up in the back, right? So each spent fuel, each fuel pool, and there's 2 on the top of each building, by the way, can take 3,450 assemblies, right? It says at the top up there, assemblies. So see the word assembly. Status of spent fuel pools. So each one, so approximately 700 spent fuel assemblies are generated every year, and they're stored in the spent fuel pool in dry cask. Now, the common spent fuel pool could have been 6,300 to 6,800. The dry cask, which was in the buildings themselves, not down on the shoreline at the other spot. Spent fuel at each reactor was 3,450, but there's multiple fuel pools, and they can hold up to 8,000 each. And because they don't have a repository, there's a good chance they were piled. So 700 spent fuel assemblies are generated each year, but they're claiming there's only 500 fuel assemblies total in reactor 1 and 2 buildings. Because they lost everything and they can't account for it, and so they can't remove something they can't account for. So now they're claiming that there's only 500, but they make 700, they create 700 new assemblies each year. It would be like Chernobyl on steroids if the spent fuel catches fire, which of course we showed you earlier it did. Each reactor holds 3,450 spent fuel assemblies. Well, the fuel pools do, not the reactors. And the common spent fuel pool. Why was it redacted? Why was it pixelated in all those pictures? 760 new pictures that came out 2 years ago. And I'm the only person who ever covered it. And you can see that presentation in my playlist. Explosion at Fukushima can only be caused by a meltdown of the reactor core. Right, so the zirconium cladding catches fire. It produces the hydrogen, and that's the detonation. Because oxygen will cause the detonation. Or the meltdown, right? Well, the fire does, obviously, but explosion at Fukushima can only have been caused by a meltdown of the reactor core. Worse than a meltdown, the spent nuclear fuel pool catches fire. Japan Power Company. Nuclear engineers says far more radioactivity inside the spent fuel ponds than in the reactors. And they felt the explosion of reactor 3, which is this one here, 25 miles away. This one was just a stump left. But last year they claimed they got all the fuel out of the pool. I showed you everybody at the beginning. Panelists debate small modular nuclear reactors. Unsafe and unnecessary, or another path to a carbon-free economy. So they had 3 panelists. And this was really surprising for me. Politics, safety, and cost, which nobody knows any of because they don't have one anywhere on the planet. But it was really interesting. Environment, nuclear energy. Small reactors are touted as the way to drive jobs and economic development. The area is devastated from the coal industry, which the nuclear industry is demonized. Devastated. Residents, environmental agencies have been left out of the process, and small modular reactors are unproven technology. As soon as I seen that, I said, well, wait a second. Maybe there's something... found a decent story for a change. When I seen Edwin Lyman, I lost all faith right away because we've covered him many times. He wrote a book about Fukushima, pure, unbelievable, vicious propaganda, vicious deceit and dishonesty. The speakers included Edwin, the notorious scum Lyman, with the Union of Unconcerned Scientists. No small modular reactors have been built in the United States, and the government says they want Virginia to be the first state to deploy commercial small modular reactors. And Lissel said during the panel discussion that there are some times in life and in the world when you don't want to be the first. I was like, that's a great statement. Whether nuclear or not, first-time design projects normally experience serious delays, cost overruns, and problems during construction and the first year of trying to get it to work. Again, right, this is beating the nuclear industry up. It's exceptional to find a story like this. Pointed to several nuclear projects underway that have experienced severe cost overruns and lengthy delays. The nuclear power industry claimed that small modular reactors will be less expensive and quicker to build. They are pure speculation, as nothing is certain about the actual costs, the commercial operation dates, operating performance, and the reliability of the designs, which is extraordinary to hear that from anybody else, isn't it? It's like weird, man. Awesome. He also said that the power generated by a small modular reactor would be expensive, and the costs are going to increase over the decades as it would take to build it. Again, right. He also said the power generated would be expensive. I got that at the end of the first time. He's the Director of Resource Planning Analyst for the Institute of Energy Economics and Financial Analyst, which are usually, in my experience, they're usually just bootlickers for the industry. He's actually challenging quite eloquently all of their fabled assertions, which is just what? Like, I'm confused. I think I might need an aspirin. I'm not used to somebody telling me the truth. The U.S. is pretty far along in its transition from coal and natural gas to renewables, in large part because the development of advanced inverter power controls. The development of advanced inverter power control has enabled standalone wind and solar resources to respond almost instantaneously. That's interesting. So power plants won't be needed in 10 or 15 years when the fabled unicorn small modular reactors would be available. Which is what I've been saying all along, obviously, right? But it's so weird to hear somebody else actually get it right, actually try to have a real conversation. It's just weird, man. We won't need large baseload plants like small modular reactors to run 24/7. Nuclear industry will run him off the road into a cliff in the next month or so. You watch. The grid will be able to handle the integration of intermittent resources with battery storage, because a lot of people get sucked into that narrative of batteries. But it's because if you're talking about storing energy for a community, a town, or a city, you should be talking about there's 20 options, and none of them are batteries. Like compressed air storage, where you dig mine shafts and just compress air down into the mine shaft with excess energy. Or water batteries, where you build two reservoirs, you pump water up when you got extra energy, and when you need it, it flows down. And by rights, you want two of them, but ideally, you wouldn't use neither one. You would use geothermal energy because it doesn't need storage, and it's available. Once you dig the hole, you're good for a couple of million years. And a stupid, easy technology. Lyman addressed the safety of small modular reactors, which he said he's most concerned about. I'm concerned about Lyman ever doing an interview. He's a notorious pump for the nuclear industry. But this time, apparently, he's a physicist and director of nuclear power safety for the Union of Unconcerned Scientists. We've covered him so many times, we don't call them concerned scientists, they're unconcerned scientists. They're professional nuclear clowns. There's about a 1% risk, this is Lyman now, there's about a 1% risk that a reactor in the country will experience a core meltdown accident like the nuclear disaster in Fukushima, Japan, and which he says followed an earthquake. They always got to throw that in there, right? It wasn't nuclear, it was the earthquake. Which is true, but I mean, they go overboard with it, right? So claiming there's a 1% risk that a reactor will have a meltdown in America when they're all old, they're all running at full speed, they're all fragile from embrittlement, right, from decades of bombardments. They're built on an old technology. They all got pools full of reactor cores hemorrhaging, flowing radiation every day into the environment because they're all splitting the atoms. So I think it's a very dishonest thing to say there's a 1% risk. Lyman, the perpetual lawyers, Jaffs spoke about the politics of small modular reactors, saying it could help melt the political polarization of climate change by having us not talk about whether climate change is a problem that we need to deal with, but having complete debates on climate change solutions. Well, the best solution for climate change is killing all nuclear immediately and containing the fuel pool emissions. Because that's what climate change is, 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry, pulsing energy every second, invisible plumes constantly coming out all day, every day. Invisible plumes, it'd be equivalent to, for something you can see would be a snowstorm covered the whole planet in 20 days, and it snows every day and it never melts for millions of years. Then you would get it really quick. But because it's doing that with radiation, you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or perceive it, then you're lulled into complacency. And that's why we do these shows, to try to help you understand the whole system is rigged against you. The perpetual liars are many. The truth is rare. It's almost as rare as a unicorn. He added that those concerned about small modular reactors might consider whether they want to pick a fight and oppose the disease factories or continue moving forward with renewables and let the issue develop over time. Well, they have one design worldwide, right? NuScale's design, and it's not complete. And it can't go through the entire regulatory process for approval until it's complete. And like the one TerraPower Bill Gates is allegedly going to build, that place doesn't close down to 2025. There's plenty of time to replace it with something sensible. It's not a question of whether we should build as much wind, as much solar, as much battery storage. Well, no, you do geothermal first. And tidal energy preferably on top second. Do we divert our own resources to opposing the small modular reactors that don't exist? Or let's say, let that develop. If we're going to develop it, we're going to keep moving on renewables, have the whole decarbonization team together. Well, as nuclear, those small modular reactors, these are vicious disease factories. The emissions are wicked, and they can't meet the requirement to contain it. And so they're screeching and crying for the last couple of weeks because the rule says you got to contain the radiation. They say, well, we can't build it. If we can't pollute everybody, what's the point of it, in other words? After the panel discussion, organizers said there remains a great debate about the cost ratepayers will bear to build a fabled small modular reactor technology and unknown risk to the communities. The panel made it clear. We should be investing in renewables and distributive technologies that are available now, not a decade from now, and move the state to a clean economy and lower cost to ratepayers. Like anybody that can't do it, just fire them and hire the guys that want to do it without. We don't need nuclear. Nuclear is an antiquated. It would never exist. Potential global catastrophe from Fukushima Unit 2 reactor, making Tokyo area uninhabitable. That's 220 kilometers away. Why would you want something like that on your planet? But of course, they're pretending that reactor 3 and 4 didn't catch fire and blow up and blow up and catch fire and blow up. And so the reactor and the fuel pool were at the top of the building. There is no building. That's the remains of reactor 4. And all of these people, I put the video, I uploaded at the weekend, just this little clip, because it's such an important clip, right? Everybody should have a playlist with that video in it. Everybody should be sharing that clip and asking that question. Why are they pretending they're in a building that don't exist? Fukushima, former Fukushima worker, I believe the country will be evacuated, number 4 fuel pool. If that fuel pool collapsed, and it did, they're pretending it didn't, the country should be evacuated. So why would you want a nuclear power plant in your country with those types of attributes? Well, because that's the industry hates your guts. Don't let them do stuff like this. Failure could affect the whole world, and I showed you the models of how that works. Former top IAEA official, actually Fukushima is a catastrophe for every citizen of the world. Radiation doesn't recognize borders. Doses from Fukushima fallout in Europe many times higher than California governor claimed for the West Coast. And I showed you earlier 220 million atoms in one study and 20 million atoms in another study, both Canadian studies. Leaked emails shows the British government worked with the nuclear companies on public relation campaigns to play down Fukushima, and that the degree of collusion between the government and the nuclear industry was shocking. It was incredibly shocking. EDF Energy, Areva, and Westinghouse. So EDF and Areva are both French. Westinghouse is Japanese, with subsidies in Canada, United States, Australia, and other countries. And so they went through a lot of trouble to stop you from knowing the truth. A British official told Areva, we need to quash any stories trying to compare this to Chernobyl. We need to ensure the anti-nuclear chaps and chapses do not gain ground on this. And we need to occupy the territory and hold it. In order, a bombardment, constant bombardment of propaganda. Fukushima nuclear report was so shocking we decided to treat it as if it didn't exist. Fearful of scaring the public. Well, I mean, they got hundreds of sirens around nuclear power plants so you can scare the public. But that was put there because after 3 Mile Island. But they're not going to use it. They can have every reactor, every fuel pool blow up and catch fire, and there's zero possibility they're going to use the siren. It's zero. The projection was based on a scenario in which a hydrogen explosion would tear through number 1 reactor's containment vessel, forcing all workers at the plant to evacuate because of the eschewing lethal radiation levels. And so they were just using reactor number 1 for that. I mean, there was 16,000 workers that ran away. These were homeless and destitute and victims of society, and the immigrants that don't speak the language, not academics, not nuclear scientists, not volunteers from nuclear industry in different countries. No, the homeless. Radiation forecasts can be no means be released to the public. Well, you're paying for all of that, right? You gave them the authority to tell you. They gave them the equipment to find it. You gave them the monetary and everything that you could ever want to find it and warn you. And what did they do when it finally happened? They stabbed you in the back every way they could. They were relentless. They chased you down and stabbed you with invisible atoms of radiation that you can't escape. Government hid radiation simulation because it was very, very bad. Japan professor showed a serious contamination over a wide area. Radiation forecast withheld by the government. Releasing it would cause panic. The ministry decided such releasing would be unavailable because they would lose power. So the government employees decided not to tell anybody because they were afraid they wouldn't get a paycheck every week. We heard this story a lot from a lot of different places, by the way. The British government was deeply involved in blatant conspiracy trying to manipulate the truth. It was a very effective attempt to calm the reporting of the true story of Fukushima. And That's why Britain should never have nuclear, because they're despicable industry. Government report said if Fukushima containment vessel was damaged, think about the arrogance of that story. That if it was damaged, the containment, which has significantly less fuel, by the way, than the fuel pools, which are missing too. That's reactor 3 over there, reactor 4 over there. They're not damaged, they're completely destroyed. Again, all these different sources saying Tokyo would be evacuated. And Tokyo, in one study after a rainfall, was 29 million atoms per square meter just after a single rainfall. And it never goes away. Like the plot of a summer horror flick all along the Canadian Pacific coast. Bodies are swollen by cancerous tumors, unprecedented mutations, allowing cancer to spread from one species to another. Imagine that, cancer as a virus, because it wasn't like that. It was just so much radiation in the ocean. They were trying to blame it on some pathogen and say it had some of the attributes of cancer. That is insane. Oh, you're collaborating with an energy company to develop a fusion power. Again, this is just propaganda. They didn't get some money. There's nothing on record. They don't have a site. They don't even have an organization. They just, well, hell, because the story came in and said, well, we want to develop a fusion power plant here. Give us all the money you got and we'll see how good we can do. Recent nuclear fusion news is more about the hydrogen bombs than energy. And they actually quote Helen Caldicott, the sadistic Helen Caldicott in that story. The Monster of Australia. I'll play a couple of clips of the Monster of Australia for you. There's a lot of monsters in the nuclear industry. The Australian nuclear industry is just gutless. The Wicked Witch herself, Helen Caldicott. We played Reactor 3, or Reactor. She's done this interview a couple of hundred times. Let me check the volume before I play it for you. I'll get there. Looks good. I'm going to adjust the volume in real time. She's going to talk about Reactor 3. I got pictures to your left of what it actually looks like. It's completely destroyed.
And especially Building 3 is very fragile. It's still got a huge cooling pool on its roof, protected by nothing.
It does not.
The molten core has melted its way down onto the concrete of the containment vessel, but maybe into the earth. And if that collapsed, there would be a nuclear inferno.
Well, it collapsed. There's a nuclear inferno. Now, when she talks about Reactor 4, she says the same thing.
Building 4 is also similarly fragile, and it's got a huge cooling pool on top with all its fuel rods, but they have been removing them. And it's been a very delicate procedure, and they've removed almost all. So if that collapsed now, I think it would probably be okay.
Okay, so that don't exist. That's two lies. Then she was asked, does the building look like the one to the right or the one to the left? I put those pictures there. The original footage is in the center. They're going to ask her, what does it really look like? Because they're showing pictures to the left that don't correspond.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. How close are we to that?
Who knows? Who knows if there's going to be an earthquake greater than 7 that'll disassemble Building 4 and maybe Building 3. And that's another terrible thing, because Building 3, if that collapses onto its corium of molten lava, huge amounts of radiation will be released. So I don't know. They say it's an act of God. I don't believe in God, but who knows? We can't predict, except to say that there are many earthquakes in this area all the time, and Japan is an earthquake-ridden island.
That's the long version. Hang on. I got the long version. Get your act together, Dana. Get your act together.
Exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine. The Japanese are very tidy people.
Hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, the Japanese are very tidy people.
They're very tidy people. It don't matter how tidy. We had a nuclear meltdown. Tidy doesn't quite cut it. The Japanese are not immune to radiation, Helen. And reactor 4 fuel pool doesn't exist. We know that because we have the documentation. Reactor 3 fuel pool doesn't exist, Helen. So why are you telling all of these lies, Helen? Helen's wrote 14 books, anti-nuclear books. And they actually quoted her in that. She's very influential, but she's the perfect weapon against humanity. And I guess that's going to be it for tonight, is it? We got 2 hours and 10 minutes punched in. Yeah, well, I guess we'll shut her down at this story. We'll pick up tomorrow. We got another whole friggin' batch of stories. We're about 600 behind right now. We're actually, I don't know what to say. We're 6, 7, 8. There's probably 8,000 stories this year that I can't get to. I collect everything, but I can't actually cover it. And so I kind of feel guilty this last year, a couple of years. I should be doing like a 3-hour show, 4-hour show a night. Because it's not fair not to tell the lies, show the lies that they told. You can't, like I do the work and I gather everything up, but you can't actually tell the story, unfortunately, right? You can't keep up with it. Which is heartbreaking, right? I cover this because it's so important and that the world is so uninformed that it wouldn't take long for the world to wake up if a few hundred people start telling the story too, right? Because the truth, people can extrapolate so much from the truth, see? Okay, how did we do on our poll? We got almost 50 likes. That's a miracle. Should the nuclear university students work at Fukushima nuclear meltdown instead of the homeless victim? A few people said no. Why would you say no? Why would you rather have nuclear academics and students working at the nuclear meltdowns? If they're going to be prolific promoting nuclear, then they should be introduced to it, right? They're enthusiastic about the nuclear industry. Send them into the nuclear meltdown. Let's get the newest, greatest Miss America to go down to Fukushima and tell all the homeless how lucky they are. So we got 50 likes. That's so awesome. YouTube will stop it. At 12 hours, my video will be longer, and it will comments will show up after 12 hours. So we'll see everybody. We'll just call it night because that's 2 hours, 10 minutes or something. We'll call it night. We'll see everybody tomorrow night at the same time. And I guess on Boxing Day or something, I'm going to start doing a recap of 2022. That's going to be so much fun. It's an absurd amount of work. But because we covered so many stories this year, like we really did cover a lot of stories this year. We'll try to do a recap on it. We can do a recap also on all the stories from the marine die-offs, because next year is coming at us full tilt and it's going to be just as nasty. The nuclear industry is really good at being evil. It's terrible at being a good partner with Earth and the species. We're going to end the poll on the same 57 votes. That was awesome. 91%. So good night for everybody. Hugs for everybody. Might as well do a quick shout out on my hair, I suppose. Gabriel Tree Wolf, Albert, Vast Thinker, Blue Jay, Dana Nasana, whose last show I forgot to call out, believe it or not. Sorry, Dana. Don Vincent Walters, Stephen Young, hi Stephen. James Lucid, hi James. Gar Wood, you know Gar, he calls in regularly to the show. Hi Gar. And everybody, I know Colette is out there somewhere. Colette S. And Angel's Place. Yeah, good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. We got absurd amount of stories already ready to go tomorrow night. We're gonna Kevin Blanche. Hi, Kevin. Jeff Poor. Tomorrow night, I'm gonna kind of flash through a lot of stories to try to get through because we got a lot piled up here. And they're always fun stories. I'm pretty good at remembering the main point of the stories. And so tomorrow night will be a lot of fun. Actually, we're going to boot through a silly amount of stories tomorrow night. And important ones will go into details a bit more, but generally we're going to skim through the stories. We got so many. And try to get caught up on what's in what I already got preloaded, right? Into the panels. Just let me quickly go up. Warren, Peaceware, Richard, and Vildra, Michael Smith, Savannah's Fourth, looks good. I got most everybody. I'll get on the most recent comments, double check, and we'll call her a night. That was a fun phone call there tonight, and we appreciate that. There was some crazy stuff in that one. See, my Geiger counter finally gave up the ghost. The batteries is usually good for 2 hours and 15 minutes if I turn it on just as I go live. So yeah, that's what it lasted. I'm surprised that battery hasn't given up the ghost. We've been using that for quite a long time, quite a few years. Well, let's say 5 years or something on that same battery. And that battery was used on the ocean where we were snapping 1,000 pictures a day, not counting video, with that same battery. Anyway, I better give it up because tomorrow night is coming really quick. Tomorrow night we're going to go flash through all kinds of stories. And otherwise we're never going to get to them, right? That's okay. It'll be a bit of fun for a night. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. If you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. I apologize for all the censorship. Take care, folks.